I was 19 years old the winter they tried to give me away, and the worst part was the silence. Not the cold, though the cold in those Blue Ridge hollows could crack a green log in two. Not the hunger, though we knew that too. It was the silence of 200 souls standing in a frozen meeting yard, watching a girl be handed off like a sack of seed corn, and not one of them daring to make a sound. A man can sell a horse out loud. To sell a person, you do it quiet and you call it something holy. "Eliza Hardin," said Elder Cyrus Holloway, and his voice rolled out over the gathering soft as warm tallow. "Come forward, child, and let the covenant be kept." The year was 1884, and Hebron Hollow was the only world I had ever known. It sat folded into the deep green seam between two ridges, 3 days hard walking from the county seat at Marshall, and farther than that from anything resembling the law. We grew what the thin mountain dirt would give us. We praised God on the Lord's Day, and we did whatever Elder Cyrus told us to do, because Elder Cyrus had built the meeting house with his own hands 40 years before, and because the men who had once stood up to him were no longer standing. I came forward. My boots were wrapped in rags against the snow, and my dress was my dead mother's, taken in twice. Beside the elder stood Deacon Prout, who was 63 years of age and had already buried 2 wives, and who looked at me the way a hungry man looks at the last of the salt pork. "This girl's father," the elder said to the crowd, "owed a debt of grace to this church. Eli Hardin, God rest him, fell from the Sutter Bluff 3 months past and left his daughter alone and unprovided. I have prayed on it. The Lord has shown me that Deacon Prout shall take her to wife, and so her father's account shall be settled, and so she shall be sheltered." He smiled at me, and his smile was the most frightening thing I had ever seen because it was kind. "Do you consent, child?" There was no answer that was permitted to me except one. I knew it the way you know the shape of a room you've lived in all your life, in the dark. Every face in that yard knew it too. The widow Combs would not meet my eyes. The Sayers girls, who had been my friends since we were small, looked at their own feet. My consent had been arranged before I was ever woken that morning. The question was only a performance, a thing the elder did so that what came next would have the smell of choice about it. I opened my mouth, and I do not to this day know what I would have said. "He's already got 2 wives in the ground," said a voice from the back of the yard. "Reckon she'd make 3. It was a low voice, rough as a rasp, and it carried because the silence was so complete that a dropped pin would have carried. Every head turned. At the rear of the gathering, by the rail fence, stood a man I half knew and the whole hollow half feared, Amos Teague, who lived alone on the high ridge above the settlement and came down maybe 4 times a year for salt and powder and thread. He was lean and weathered to the color of a saddle, with a beard going gray and eyes that didn't shift when other men's did. His coat was patched at both elbows. His boots were worse than mine. He owned, by every account in the hollow, almost nothing in this world. "This is church business, Teague," the elder said, and for the first time the warmth went out of his voice. "It does not concern a man who keeps no pew. I'm making it concern me." Amos came forward through the crowd, and the crowd parted for him the way water parts for a stone. He stopped a few feet from the elder, and he did not look afraid, and I had never once in my life seen a grown man in Hebron Hollow stand before Cyrus Holloway and not look afraid. The girl's of age and her own woman. Her daddy left her a cabin and a quarter section on the North Fork. By mountain right, that's hers to keep or hers to give. I'll take her on and the church's debt with her, whatever you reckon it to be. I'll pay it out of my own work over the season. It was not a grand offer. He had nothing grand to make it with. But it was a real one, made out loud, in front of 200 witnesses, and that was a thing the elder had not planned for. I watched something move behind Cyrus Holloway's eyes, a quick, cold calculation, the look of a man whose ledgers have come up short by a figure he cannot afford. "You don't know what you're taking on, Teague," the elder said softly. "Most things worth taking on you don't." And that was how a poor man with patches on both elbows bought my freedom without a single coin, in the last moment before it was sold for good. And how I came to climb up out of the only world I'd ever known, into the cold high country, beside a stranger I was certain would prove to be just another kind of cage. The climb up to the ridge took the better part of the afternoon, and I spent every step of it afraid. I had no reason yet to think Amos Teague was any different from Deacon Prout, or from the elder, or from my own father, who had taught me young that a man's gentleness was a thing he spent, and then expected paid back with interest. I walked behind him on the narrow trail with my mother's quilt and my few things bundled on my back, and I watched the set of his shoulders, and I tried to ready myself for what mountain men did to girls they'd carried off. I had heard the stories. Every girl in the hollow had. He didn't speak the whole way up. When the trail turned to ice, he stopped and broke it ahead of me with the heel of his boot, and when a low pine branch hung across the path, he held it back until I had passed. But he didn't speak, and he didn't touch me, and he didn't once look back at me with that hungry Prout look. By the time the cabin came into sight in the failing light, I had wound myself so tight with dread that I was near sick with it. The cabin was one room. I want to be plain about that because it tells you everything about the man. It was one room of hand-hewn logs chinked with clay, with a stone hearth at one end and a single rope-strung cot at the other, and a table, and a stool, and a shelf of traps and tools, and that was the whole of his kingdom. There was no second room for a man to keep a woman in. There was no wealth here that a wife was meant to polish. There was a poor man's hard, clean life, and now there were two of us to live it. He built up the fire without a word and set a pot of beans to warming. He gave me the only chair, and when full dark came and the wind began to climb the ridge and moan in the chinking, I stood by that single cot with my heart going like a trapped bird, and I made myself say it. "Where do you mean for me to sleep?" He was banking the fire, crouched at the hearth with his back to me. "There, it's yours." "And you?" "Floor by the door suits me fine." He stood and brushed the ash from his hands. "Been sleeping rough 30 years. A board floor's a feather bed to what I'm used to." I didn't understand. I had been raised to a single arithmetic where every kindness was the front half of a transaction, and I could not find the back half of this one. "You paid for me," I said. "You stood up in front of the whole hollow and you took on Pa's debt. You bought me." He turned and looked at me then, full on, for the first time since the meeting yard. The firelight ran along the gray in his beard. "I didn't buy you, girl. There's no such thing as buying a person, no matter what that man in the meeting house tells you. I bought you out from under him. That's a different thing entire." He took his coat down off the peg and rolled it for a pillow. "Come the thaw, when the trail's open, you can go down the mountain to Marshall and take the road to wherever you've a mind to go. You don't owe me your work, and you surely don't owe me anything else. Till then, it's warm here and the door bars from the inside, and the bar's on your side of it tonight, not mine." I have tried many times in the years since to describe what happened in me when he said that, and the closest I have come is this. It was like the breath you take after you've been held too long under cold water. It hurt going in. I sat down on the edge of that cot, and I put my mother's quilt over my face so he would not see, and I wept the way you weep when you have been brave for a very long time, and are suddenly, without warning, allowed to stop. He didn't come to comfort me. He didn't pat my shoulder or speak soft nothings. He set a tin cup of the bean broth on the floor within my reach, and then he lay down across the doorway in his shirt sleeves with the bar of the door at my side of the room, and he let me cry in peace. I think now that was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for me, to give me the dignity of not being watched. What followed were the strangest, sweetest weeks of my life up to then. Though I would not have called them sweet while they were happening, only quiet and slowly less afraid. The deep mountain winter closed the trails behind us, and we settled into the rhythm of two people sharing one small room and keeping clear of each other's hurts. Amos was gone before light most mornings, out on his snowshoes to run the trap lines that strung along the high creeks, and he came home at dusk crusted in ice with whatever the mountain had given him, a marten, a fox, a brace of rabbits. I learned his ways the way you learn weather. He did not waste words and he did not waste motion, and he never once raised his voice, not to me, not to the dogs, not to the world. I took over the cabin because idle hands frightened me, and because I needed to feel I was paying for the air I breathed even when he kept telling me I owed him nothing. I patched the chinking where the wind got through. I learned to skin and stretch the hides, and made a poor job of it at first and a fair one by February. I cooked what there was to cook. And little by little the dread bled out of me and left something underneath it I hadn't felt since I was a small child. A plain, animal safety. The safety of knowing that the man across the room meant you no harm. It was in those weeks that I started finding the birds. The first one I found on the windowsill in the gray of a morning, after he'd already gone out. It was a little carved bird no bigger than my thumb, a wren by the look of it, whittled out of a knot of cherry wood and rubbed smooth with bare grease until it shone soft. I thought at first it had been left there years before by some other hand. But 2 days later there was a second one beside it, a chickadee with its head cocked, and I understood that he was making them. Sitting by the fire of an evening with his knife while I pretended to mend, carving these small free things and setting them out where I would find them in the morning without either of us having to say a word about it. I never thanked him for them. I understood by then that thanks embarrassed him, that he would only grunt and look away. So I lined them up along the windowsill instead, a little flock of them gathering through the winter, wren and chickadee and nuthatch and a fat little junco, all of them facing out the window toward the open sky, and I let the row of them be my thanks, and I think he understood it as such. One night late in February, with the wind screaming up the ridge and the fire snapping, he asked me a question. It was the first true question he had ever put to me. "That preacher," he said, not looking up from the knife. "What did your daddy owe him truly? A man doesn't sell his own girl over a debt of grace. Debt of grace. There's no figure on a thing like that. Just a number a man invents when he means to take what he wants." I had my mother's quilt over my knees, and I remember how still everything went in me. Pa borrowed seed money from the church store. The year the blight took the corn, he couldn't pay it back. The elder said grace would cover the principal but not the increase, and the increase grew every season Pa lived. I picked at the quilt. When Pa fell from the bluff, the elder said the debt fell to me, and that the only Christian way to settle it was for the church to take me into a good house. Deacon Pruitt's house. Amos was quiet a moment. "Your daddy fall or get fell?" And the room tilted, the way a room does when someone says aloud the thing you have carried alone so long you'd half convinced yourself you imagined it. I did not answer him that night. I told him I was tired and I lay down and faced the wall, and he let it go, because he was a man who let things go. But the question had been spoken now, and it sat in the cabin with us like a third presence, and 3 nights later, when I could not carry it one more hour by myself, I sat up by the dying fire and I told Amos Teague the truth I had told no living soul. "My father didn't fall from the Sutter Bluff," I said. He set down his knife. "I was with him. We were up on the bluff at dusk, the two of us, because Pa had gone to have it out with the elder over the debt, and the elder had walked him up there to talk private, away from the houses. I'd followed because I was afraid for Pa, and I hid in the laurel where they couldn't see me." My voice was steady, which surprised me. I had imagined this moment so many times that when it finally came it had the worn smoothness of the carved birds. Pa told the elder he was done paying. He said he'd been to a lawyer in Marshall over the winter, a real lawyer, and that the church store ledgers were a fraud, that the elder had been charging increase that no scripture and no law allowed, charging it for 40 years, to keep every family in the hollow owing him so deep they'd never be free of him. Pa said he meant to lay it before the circuit judge. He said the whole hollow was being held in a debt that didn't rightly exist. I made myself say the rest. The elder put his hand on Pa's shoulder the way he does, gentle like a blessing, and then he pushed him off the bluff, 40 feet onto the rocks, and then he stood at the edge a long while looking down, and he turned and he saw me in the laurel. He saw me see it. The fire popped. He didn't run at me or threaten me. He just looked at me calm as Sunday, and he said, "Your father has gone to his reward, Eliza. It's a grief. Come down and we'll see you cared for." And I knew. I knew right then that the marrying off wasn't mercy, and it never had been. He wasn't settling Pa's debt. He was settling Pa's witness. He was going to tie me into a house he controlled under a man who'd keep me quiet, so the one person who saw what he did could never speak it where it mattered. For a long moment Amos didn't move. Then he stood and crossed the room and crouched in front of me so his weathered face was level with mine, and he looked at me with no horror and no doubt, only a terrible calm certainty. "Then he can't ever let you go free, Eliza," he said quietly. "Not down the mountain, not anywhere. A debt he can forgive, a wife he can give to Prute, but a witness who walks loose to the county seat that he cannot abide. He didn't lose a bride in that yard the day I stood up. He lost the one mouth that can hang him." He glanced toward the dark window, and I saw the same thought cross his face that had begun, slowly, to chill mine. "And he knows exactly which ridge I live on." As if the mountain itself meant to prove him right, one of the dogs by the door lifted its head and growled low in its chest. Amos rose and went still as a held breath, and far down the black slope below the cabin, small and bobbing and patient, came the light of a lantern climbing the trail. Then a second, then a third. He had not waited for the thaw. Amos moved through the cabin without haste, which frightened me more than haste would have. He doused the lamp and let only the low hearth glow remain, and he barred the door, and he took down the old long rifle from its pegs and laid it on the table, and a second smaller pistol that he pressed into my two hands, folding my fingers around it. "They'll want you alive if they can," he said. "Dead does him near as well, but alive and married off does it cleanest, so they'll try and talk first. Don't you believe a word of it. You stay back from that window and behind the hearthstone, and if any man but me comes through that door, you point this at the middle of him and you pull, and you don't think on it after. You hear me?" I heard him. The lanterns came on up the trail, and then they stopped just below the cabin where the trees thinned, and a voice called up to us through the wind, and it was the elder's own voice, warm as ever, gentle as a blessing. "Eliza, child, come on out now. There's no need for any of this." I said nothing. Amos had his rifle laid across the windowsill in the dark. "The mountain's no place for a girl," the elder called. "Mr. Teague has done you no kindness taking you up to freeze. Come down to the hollow where you're loved. We've all been so worried." A pause, and then, lower, with the warmth thinning out of it, "Your father would want you safe, Eliza. Don't make me grieve a second harden this winter." It was the second harden that did it, the threat dressed as a prayer. I felt the fear in me, the old borrowed fear that the whole hollow lived inside of, and then I felt it meet something harder underneath, and I called back through the chinking in a voice that did not shake. "I saw you, elder, on the bluff. I saw your hand." The wind took the words down the slope, and for a moment there was only the wind. Then I heard him give the order, soft, to the men with him, and the soft of it was worse than any shout. "She's distressed and she's not herself. Bring her down. Mind the trapper." What followed I have never been able to lay out in clean order, only in pieces, the way a lightning flash leaves a field printed on your eyes in fragments. The crack of a rifle and the window glass coming in across the floor. Amos shoving me down behind the hearthstone with one hard arm. The boom of his long rifle, so loud in that small room it stopped my heart, and a cry from the dark outside. Men's boots on the snow, circling. A shoulder hitting the barred door once, twice. The smell of powder smoke filling the cabin. Amos breaching the rifle, the spent brass ringing on the boards, his hand steady as a clockmaker's while the world came apart. And then a shape at the broken window, a man swinging a leg through, a long knife in his fist and his eyes finding me where I crouched, and I did the thing Amos had told me to do. I raised the pistol in both hands and I pointed it at the middle of him and I pulled, and the gun bucked and roared, and the man fell back out into the snow and did not climb in again. I do not say this with pride. I say it because it is true, and because in that moment some last childish part of me, the part that had stood mute in the meeting yard waiting to be given away, burned clean out of me and did not come back. Amos looked at me once across the smoke. He didn't say good, and he didn't say I'm sorry *. He said, "We're not winning this from inside a box. and he was right. There were too many of them, and the elder would burn us out before he'd let us walk, and the only thing on this earth that could stop Cyrus Holloway was the very thing he had killed my father to keep buried. "We go down," I said, "to the hollow, to all of them." He understood me at once. "It's his ground down there, his people. They'll do what he says, they always have. They always have because they each think they're the only one afraid." I was up on my knees, the pistol still hot in my hand. "He's been collecting a debt off the whole hollow for 40 years that the law never said he could. Pa found it out. If I say it where everyone hears it at once, not whispered, not one at a time where he can pick us off, but all of them together in one place, then it's not just my word against his anymore. It's mine, and then it's theirs, and then it's everyone's, and he can't push a whole hollow off a bluff." For the first time, Amos Teague looked at me not as a girl he had pulled out of a fire, but as something else, a partner in a hard piece of work. "The Covenant Gathering," he said. "He calls them all to the meeting house at First Light Sundays. That's tomorrow. Everyone in the hollow under one roof. Then that's where I'm going to talk." We went out the root door at the back of the cabin while his dogs raised hell at the front. Down a deer trail Amos knew in the dark the way I know my own hands, the lanterns of the elders' men swinging behind us and falling away. We were down off the ridge before dawn, cold to the bone, and we came into Hebron Hollow not as fugitives slinking, but walking up the frozen road in the gray light, straight toward the meeting house where the whole settlement was already gathering, summoned to praise on the Lord's day, with no notion yet of what was about to walk in among them. The meeting house was full and warm with 200 bodies when I came through the doors, and Elder Cyrus Holloway was standing in the pulpit he had built with his own hands, and his face when he saw me was a thing I will keep till I die. He had thought me run, or taken, or dead on the ridge. He had not thought me here. "Eliza," he said, and the warmth came up over his face like a curtain, smooth and fast. "Praise God. The child's come home to us. Brothers, sisters, she's been up the mountain with the trapper, frightened out of her wits, talking wild. My father didn't fall." I said it from the back of the meeting house, and I said it loud, so it reached the rafters and every soul beneath them. The elder's mouth kept moving, but no one was listening to him now. They had all turned to me. "Eli Hardin didn't fall from the Sutter Bluff. I was there. I watched Elder Cyrus push him off it with his own hand because my father had found out the truth and meant to take it to the circuit judge in Marshall. The girl is hysterical. The church store ledgers are a fraud." I was walking up the aisle now between the rows of my neighbors, and Amos came behind me. "Every one of you owes the church store. You've owed it your whole lives. Your daddy's owed it before you. He charges increased interest on the seed and the salt and the cloth, more every year, and he has done it for 40 years, and there is no scripture for it and there is no law for it, and a real lawyer in Marshall told my father so. He keeps you all in debt on purpose. He keeps you owing so deep you'll never be free of him, and he calls it grace. And you have been afraid of him your whole lives over a debt that was never rightly yours to carry." The silence in that room was the same silence from the meeting yard the day they tried to give me away. But it was breaking. I could feel it breaking. I could see it moving across the faces of people I had known all my life. The widow Combs, the Sayers girls, old men who had bent their necks to Cyrus Holloway for 50 years. "She lies," the elder said, and now there was something in his voice that had never been there before in all my life. There was fear in it. "She lies, and the trapper put her up to it, and I will not stand here and be." "Brother Tull." It was the widow Combs who spoke. She had risen from her pew, a small gray woman who had not raised her voice in the meeting house once in all the years I'd been alive. "Brother Tull, you keep the store ledgers fair copied. Is there increase wrote in them?" A long, terrible pause, and then from the side of the room a heavy-set man with a clerk's stoop got slowly to his feet, and he would not look at the elder, and he said, "There is. There's always been. I copy it out every quarter. His voice cracked. I never thought I was allowed to ask. And that was the moment the borrowed power came due. I have thought about it many times since, what happened in that meeting house, and the truest way I can say it is this. Fear is a thing people lend. No man holds it on his own. Cyrus Holloway had no army and no badge and no strength in his old arms. Everything he ever held over Hebron Hollow, he held only because 200 people had each agreed, alone, in the privacy of their own frightened hearts, to keep lending it to him. And fear lent in secret can be called back in the open all at once. The Sayers girl's father stood up. Then 3 men from the North Fork. Then a dozen more, then the whole back of the room, and the noise rose, and it was not a mob's noise. It was worse for the elder than that. It was the noise of 200 people discovering, in the same breath, that they had never been alone in being afraid. The elder's men, the ones who had come up my mountain in the night, were in that room too. I saw them by the wall, 4 of them, hard, hollow men with the elder's wages in their pockets. And I saw them look at the rising room and do the arithmetic, the same cold arithmetic I'd watched the elder do the day Amos stood up. And I watched them decide that no wage on earth was worth standing between Cyrus Holloway and 200 neighbors who were no longer afraid. They sat down. They sat down and they took off their hats, and one of them, a young one I'd gone to school with, began quietly to cry. It was over after that, though it took some doing. Amos sent the swiftest of the Sayers boys down the road to Marshall, 3 days' walk, and in time the circuit judge came up to Hebron Hollow with 2 deputies, and there were the ledgers, and there was Brother Tull who copied them, and there was my testimony, and there was, in the end, the testimony of the men who'd come up the ridge that night and decided to tell the truth rather than hang for another man's killing. Cyrus Holloway was taken down the mountain in irons on the back of a mule, and he did not look kind anymore, and he did not look warm. He looked like what he had always been underneath, a small, frightened, greedy old man who had held a whole valley in his hand only so long as the valley let him. The law tidied up what the hollow had already decided, but it was the hollow that decided it. I want that set down plain. The law only came to write it up. The thaw came late that year, the way it does in the high Blue Ridge, all at once in April, with the creeks running brown and full and the redbud breaking out pink along the ridges. By rights I was free then, free in every way there was. The debt was gone, struck out of the false ledgers by the judge's own hand. My father's cabin and his quarter section on the North Fork were mine. The road to Marshall was open. And beyond Marshall the road to anywhere, to towns I'd never seen and a life no man had arranged for me. Amos had told me, that first cold night, that come the thaw I could go wherever I had a mind to go, and now the thaw was here, and I had every coin of freedom a girl could ask for to spend. I walked down to the crossroads below the hollow on a bright morning to spend it. The eastern fork ran down to Marshall and the wide world. The western fork ran up toward the high ridge. I stood at the meeting of them a long while with my mother's quilt roll on my back, and I thought about all the things a free woman could do with a free road, and then I turned my back on the eastern fork and I climbed the western one, up the mountain, home. He was at the woodpile when I came into the yard, and he straightened up and saw the roll on my back and got the wrong idea of it, the way a man like Amos would. "Road's open," he said, gruff, looking at the axe in his hands and not at me. "I'll walk you down to Marshall myself if you want company on the trail. It's no trouble." "I've already done my walking for the day," I said. "I came up." He didn't answer. He didn't know how, I think. So I went past him into the one-room cabin to set my things down, and that was when I saw them. The windowsill. All winter I had been lining up the little carved birds he made, the wren and the chickadee and the nuthatch and the junco, a small flock of them facing out toward the open sky. While I'd been down at the crossroads choosing my road, he had carved a dozen more and set them all out, finches and a thrush and a tiny wood duck and a bird I couldn't name. The whole sill crowded with them now, 24 small free things, every one of them carved facing the open window, not one of them turned inward, not one of them caged. I stood and looked at them a long time. Then I went back out to the yard where he stood by the woodpile with the axe hanging from his hand, not knowing what to do with his own hope, and I walked right up close to him, the way no one in Hebron Hollow had ever dared walk up to anyone, and I put my hand flat against his chest over his heart. "I've seen what they do down there," I said, "the kind men and the godly men, what they do to a person for a debt that isn't real. I stood in that meeting house and I watched a whole valley be afraid for 40 years. There's no safety down there, Amos. Not the kind I want." His breath had gone shallow under my hand. "Up here a body's poor and the winters are hard and there's nothing but one room and a cold floor and the work. But I've thought on it the whole way up the mountain, and I'd rather be free and poor with you than safe and owned by anyone ever again, for the rest of my life." For a long moment the only sound was the creek running full with the thaw and the wind in the high pines. Then Amos Teague did something I had never once seen him do in all the months I'd known him. He smiled. It came up slow and hard through the gray beard and the weathered hide of his face, like sun coming over a ridge, and it changed the whole of him. He didn't say anything. He never did when something mattered enough. He only set down the axe, and he reached up and took my hand from his chest and held it in both of his rough ones, swallowing it up in warmth. And we stood there together in the spring sun at the top of the mountain, two poor people who owned almost nothing in this world except the only thing that had ever truly been ours to give, which was the choice. And up on the windowsill behind us, a whole flock of small wooden birds sat facing the open sky, none of them caged, every one of them free to go, and every one of them home.